Hello, babes. Welcome to the Canna Boss Babes. Today's guest is Victoria J. Cvitanovic, an attorney with deep expertise in psychedelic medicine, cannabis, healthcare, and corporate law. As a part of the powerhouse-led women team at Rudick Law Group, PLLC, she helps healthcare professionals and businesses navigate some of the most highly regulated industries in the country. But Victoria is far more than a lawyer. She is a passionate Zen Buddhist, a patient advocate, and a person living with a physical disability who is fiercely committed to improving accessibility and inclusion. She also serves as the president for the board of Kinship Center, a senior wellness hub offering holistic programming for people over 65. And if that wasn't enough, she co-founded Sober Zen, a meditation group exploring the intersection of sobriety and mindfulness, and developed a CLE training called Mindfulness for prosecutors and victim advocates. It's an honor to welcome someone doing such meaningful work across law, wellness, and advocacy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You've done a lot of work, honey. It was really hard to narrow it down. I've just been so impressed with your voice online. It was great connecting on LinkedIn. You have a powerful, I love what you've been contributing to the space there. And I'm excited to learn more about your story of how you got into all of this with law and cannabis and psychedelics. So thanks for joining us today to share.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it.
So how did things get started? Why cannabis? Why psychedelics? Did one come before the other?
Yes. So how I got started after law school was I was actually a narcotics prosecutor in New Orleans, Louisiana. I started out of school at a time when a lot of new graduates were coming into the legal field. We had all been part of the 2008 recession that happened. A lot of people went to grad school because jobs weren't available, and we had a massive new class of JDs. So everyone was applying for everything. And I don't know that all of us were thinking very consciously about how the job we ended up with would shape the rest of our lives, but mine certainly did. I came into prosecution really unaware of the level of harm caused by drug policy in this country. I was raised in the rural South. I was raised in a very traditional Christian environment, and I had been raised with the idea that punishments were in this country and that punishments really matched the crime in this country. Then I joined the DA's office and found very quickly that not only was harm not the measure used to decide punishments a lot of the time, but also that I had very limited control to do anything about it. District attorney is an elected official, and that elected official really decides how much authority an assistant district attorney has to alter sentences or offer deals, things like that. And it's a very hard line for those elected officials to walk. On one hand, they have been entrusted with the public's vision of what criminal justice should be. And having 100 or 50 assistant district attorneys individually interpreting that vision isn't really what the public voted for. But on the other hand, nobody knows the ins and outs of that case except for the defendant themselves and their attorney, quite like the individual prosecutor who's working on the file. So when that happens, we have a real limitation on the amount of good that we can do in any one given case. And that's deeply hard to accept when you're a young lawyer. I
Yeah.
left public service very upset about drug policy. I left totally unsure of how many people who, in my view, should have been helped by the healthcare system, they should have been patients, ended up being prosecuted. And I wanted to do something about it. So I got into general healthcare law and I started working with doctors to try to figure out why this is happening, why our healthcare system was missing so many people, and help them organize businesses that could pull more of those people in and do more socially responsible medicine while being able to pay their mortgage and being able to pay their bills. The
Mm.
corporate and healthcare law started to build, and I was enjoying that practice. But in 2020, I was in an accident, and it changed the entire direction of my life.
Okay, and that accident, so is when you broke your back, is that correct?
That's correct. So I broke my back at the gym. I fell. I used to do aerial silks, and
Oh,
it was such a passion of mine. It helped me feel creative despite working in a very logical field. But I fell, I broke my back, and immediately afterwards, everything changed. That fall took less than 3 seconds to hit the floor, and I never got up the same person again. I
doing something you had done millions of times before, I'm
was
sure. It's a beautiful art. I'm very familiar with it, not personally, but it's beautiful and yeah, looks fun to try, but maybe not always safe then.
so I was the victim of a freak accident. This
Okay.
was one of those situations where, despite all normal safety protocols being taken and everything going the right way, I still slipped. And that's the risk you take when you decide to do these riskier art forms.
You were being called into work. Sometimes those things happen to us or for us, right?
Yes,
Unfortunately.
exactly. So I fell and I remember getting up. I remember stumbling out of the warehouse door into the street where my husband was picking me up. I remember collapsing, and that's the last thing I remember for the next 2 days. My husband told me he took me to the hospital and that I had an emergency CT revealing what was going on with my back. I had surgery very shortly afterwards and would ultimately have 9 procedures on my back. Technically, there's a 10th one in there, but it wasn't as serious as the others. So I had these procedures on my back and I was living in serious chronic pain. It was the first time in my life as someone who has loved being athletic and who has loved being in the gym and movement that I felt out of control of my body. All of a sudden, this thing that I had put so much love and effort into wasn't there for me as a coping mechanism anymore. And everything in my life felt like it was falling apart. I was in so much pain that it was affecting my relationships and my ability to be a person. I have a lovely husband who is the most wonderful person in the world, and he was clearly really struggling with just how angry and upset that I was all the time. My friends were struggling to hold that. It was like I had way too much stuff in my hands. I was
Yeah.
so angry and upset and sad and grieving that I was just holding on to too much stuff, and there was nowhere to put it down, or so I thought. A lovely client of mine, this person who I describe as a dream client because she really is just a wonderful, brilliant person, came to me and she said, "Hey, Victoria, you know I do psychedelic assisted therapy. If you want help, I want to help you. I want you to come to my office and do some sessions." And I laughed at her. Oh my gosh, I laughed at her. I was like, I'm an ex-narcotics prosecutor. I have like sterling credentials. I do really strict corporate law in a conservative state. I'm this very sober Zen Buddhist. I don't even drink alcohol. Why would I take psychedelics? And she was like, Victoria, you're not listening. You're suffering and you don't have to.
Yeah.
Brushed her off. I brushed her off. And she went to my priest. She went to my priest, who is the absolute spiritual figure in my life, this person who's guided me through so much. She told him, Victoria's suffering, and she doesn't have to be. I can help her. But she thinks that somehow her religion obligates her to suffer in this way.
Wow.
So my priest sat me down and he was like, Victoria, do you think psychedelic assisted therapy is for connection or is it for delusion? Is it for running
Mm.
away? And that just broke me. All of a sudden, it became clear that all these people weren't invested in me sitting down and getting high. That
Right.
wasn't the point. It was never the point. The point was for me to be able to put some of this stuff down so that I could rejoin the community.
Yeah. Wow. From a priest. That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. Oh, I have someone that wants to say hello. He's
Oh
up
my
to
goodness.
control
Hi,
for
Kitty.
me. So um I was amazed when I entered this space, and one of the people on the board of the Cannabis Business Association I joined was a pastor here in the community. And when I got to talk to him, when I got over being shy, I asked him, like, how did you end up here? Because it just feels two opposites, right? If you believe in one, then you can't the other. And he said it was actually the number of parishioners that came to him sharing how cannabis was the only thing that made them feel better. And so he was like, it being a plant and God put it on here on the planet on purpose, right? Nothing's here by accident. That, yeah, it just really made him take another look at it and what it can do and is possible. Okay, go ahead.
No, it changed me. It absolutely changed me. I remember coming to after my first journey, and my client slash provider was in the room, and I grabbed her hands and I said, "Oh my God, you have to let me look at your insurance." And she laughed, and I was like, "You don't understand. This can never go away."
Yeah. So instant relief then?
Instant.
Maybe not fully, but like you could feel it or yeah.
Definitely. The depression, I would say that relief was fairly instant. At least within a week, I felt so much better. And I felt so much more at peace with my pain.
Mm,
Pain is an impatient thing. It draws all of your attention every second. And what psychedelic assisted therapy allowed me to do was to have enough space from my pain to think about something else for the first time in months. It was
yeah.
that freedom to be with my pain that was so much more important to me than the idea that all of a sudden all my nerves were going to be healed and it wasn't going to hurt anymore. That's
Mm,
going to hurt probably for the rest of my life to some degree or another. It's gotten better, but I still deal with it. But that separation, the fact that I didn't have to live with it stuck to every inch of me, that
mm,
changed everything for me.
yeah.
And so when I had my first integration session, I was sitting there looking at contracts for insurance for psychedelic assisted therapy providers because
Mm,
this could not go away.
yeah.
And when I left that session, I knew that this was what I was going to do with the rest of my life. It was just a matter of getting there. I started reorganizing my practice around supporting doctors and other healthcare providers that were starting to work in psychedelic medicine. And by doing that, cannabis came in. Cannabis medicine is such an essential piece of the same people that are seeking out psychedelic medicine that it found
But with
its way
you, it was
to
psychedelics first.
definitely,
Oh,
definitely.
wow. You don't hear that often.
No, I haven't heard it from another lawyer, and it's been
No,
very
no.
interesting perspective to have because cannabis clients are different. Cannabis
Yeah.
as a discipline operates in a much different way than psychedelic medicines do because the discipline is still being established on that side. And so the fact that I've been able to be a part of this thing as it begins and grows has been just the gift of a lifetime. And I'm so thankful for the other lawyers and advocates that have started to pave that very hard road.
Yeah, I imagine it's not the easiest. There's stigma already, but then how is that even within the realm of law? I wonder. You're dealing with something that goes against the laws that have been written for so long and having to really fight for and advocate for the use of psychedelics and plant medicine for people.
Absolutely. And I've taken it to be my responsibility to keep my behavior legal and ethical and to use those substances in locations where I can. But
Yeah.
when I started talking publicly about the fact that I'm a lawyer with a Southern accent that is using psychedelic assisted therapy, I was not ready for the level of reaction that I was going to get. There was a period when I thought I might lose my law license, all for
Oh, really?
advocating for legal treatment that I had been prescribed and received. This was something that was viewed as problematic or similar to drug use when I was just a human being who had gone through all of the channels. I was going quote
You did
unquote,
all the things right.
and I was still being called out as advocating for inappropriate behavior. And I really had to just put my foot down and be like, you live in a body. The disability community is the only community all of us can join in any second.
Yeah.
Every single person in this lifetime, unless they are exceptionally lucky, will experience a condition that can become disabling over their life. The
Well, and 80% of disabilities are invisible. So that's not even considering that I think most of us do walk around with disabilities we're often not aware of. Yeah.
Exactly. There's nothing in me was willing to give up the idea that there was a safe, effective treatment when I needed it,
Mhm.
and that I was able to access it because I was able to find it and pay for it. And the next person might not be so lucky. There are
Mhm.
1,000 me's, 100,000 me's, a million me's without my resources. And it is my obligation as a fellow human being to advocate for that.
As a fellow human being, yes, it is. Thank you for that. I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now, that concept, a fellow human being, and what our responsibility is to ourselves and each other.
I agree with that. The biggest delusion we've all been sold is that there's a such thing as other people.
Any type of other. Yeah,
Yes.
right?
There's a such thing as other people. I said we are all walking each other home. We are on this together. And psychedelics made it incredibly clear to me that my responsibility was not to myself and my own treatment, but it was for the next person and the next provider that was struggling to be able to pay their mortgage, struggling to be able to stay compliant. And I
Yeah.
knew that I could use my legal skills to do that. When cannabis came later, it was so incredibly helpful for me because there were these more established ventures that I could look to in a regulated environment to help people build out something new and different. They have different needs, and I would strongly encourage people to consider those differences before practicing as if they're one and the same. But the cannabis market has assisted the psychedelics market in that way. It's shown us that a Schedule 1 substance is not really untouchable if you do this slowly and correctly. And I think psychedelics are starting to take some of those lessons on, customize it for that particular industry, and move forward.
Yeah, yeah. It's been really interesting learning about the different psychedelics that are available therapeutically. And psilocybin, of course, has been like one of the big ones. Everyone's got the bars everywhere now, which is an interesting thing. And we can get into what you think of that too, of them being at every single gas station across the country. There's also like the ketamine and the clinics and even LSD, like just showing more and more. I keep seeing all these reports of studies where they're helping people. And then there's one recently, a client that I work with, trusted Canna nurse, Megan Mbenge. She recently came across a study, I think it was down at CannaMed a few weeks ago, where it's showing that higher THC doesn't necessarily mean you're getting higher or getting more benefits. And so I think that's so interesting too, because I almost feel like things are a little more therapeutic with the microdose at times than getting completely seeing stars and whatnot, which I can also have enjoy. So I don't judge, but I find a microdose is what really helps me more every day. I take a little microdose mushroom gummy each day before I go and take my walk, and my body is less achy. I'm more in tune with the nature around me. I swear the squirrels come talk to me even more. And it's just a different experience and openness and clarity of mind and purpose when I do that.
That's wonderful. One of the reasons why I think the psychedelic advocacy that's going on right now is so important is that so many people have experienced benefits from these really small doses.
Mm.
There are a few organizations who advocate for the legalization specifically of microdosing. The idea that these small personal use amounts are unlikely to cause harm and are extremely beneficial to them based on their own experience in their own bodies. When we think about how low the risks are with certain plants, especially for an average healthy person, you can see where that reasoning comes from, where someone might say that microdosing is the path to legalization that they want to advocate for.
That's interesting. I can see that, but I also wouldn't, learning what I have about harm reduction the last few years as well, which I feel like if you're in the cannabis industry or psychedelics industry or any type of industry where we're dealing with regulated substances, there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot to learn. And harm reduction has been one of the things where my eyes were open because I do still hold stigma myself in certain places. Heroin scares me, meth scares me, although I had a few teenage experiences with it, right? But there's a fear around drugs, I think, and that keeps us from actually knowing the truth in some cases. And yeah, microdosing, that's great. That gets us a little of the way there, a micro step closer. But I also don't necessarily believe in capping it. I think that we as people should be a bit more autonomous when it comes to our own care.
I agree with you. I think that the kind of punitive way that we think about drugs leads to a punitive system. You asked me a
Mm.
little earlier about like stigma in the law, and there's this one story that comes to mind every time. I want to point out that this story took place in the year of our Lord, 2024. This was in the
Okay.
early days. This was pretty recent.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to interview with an absolutely fabulous firm located exclusively in the American South. So it's a regional firm. These were really wonderful people. But as of 2024, they hadn't started a cannabis practice, much less a psychedelics practice. They had asked me to come in and interview. A dear friend works there, and she wanted to start a cannabis practice and was like, Victoria would be the right person. And I was like, I'm not coming without the psychedelics. The psychedelics started first. And she's okay, we'll see what they say. I went through the first interview. The first interview went great, but they were getting some pushback from some of their partners. So they asked me to interview with the entire partnership.
Mm.
I said, of course, if this is not something you're comfortable with, it's not something that you should have at your firm. So let's talk about it. And we get there, everyone's very pleasant, everyone's very kind. But the first question I got was, so do people ever tell you that what you're doing is evil?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really real. We're incredibly
Wow.
lucky as attorneys to have long careers. Most people stay a lawyer for a very long time, and we get to work with a lot of different age groups. I work with
Interesting.
people who are a lot younger than me, and I work with people who are a lot older than me. And having the benefit of all of those generations being at the same law firm also comes with some really interesting perspectives. And you can see the phases of the drug war as you
Yeah.
go through the bar when you see people who remember when it was researched and open and people were experimenting with psychedelics, when people were coming of age during the crackdown, when people were coming of age during the Just Say No movement, you can really see how that education we received when we were really small has
Mhm.
affected all of our opinions up until how we're going to make money at our law firm and whether or not a practice area is appropriate.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. That sounds a little fun having to sit there and I'm like, give me all the questions. I'll tell you what I know. I may not be able to answer them all, but let's do it. But also 2024, yeah, evil. To think of it as evil. I don't, I guess I've been away from the church so long. I grew up in the church when I was younger, but I've been away from it because it was not a very good church. So it was very culty. So I got away pretty early. And I've studied a lot of other different religions. And the one that feels the most home to me or the most truthful is Buddhism, that interconnectedness again. We're all connected. But I've not even considered in the last 6 years I've been in the cannabis industry, it being seen as evil. That's like a whole other stigma we're dealing with that I think that we don't really address so much. We talk about it getting high, we talk about overdoses, but evil, the religious argument, evil. How is a plant that God made evil?
It's a very confusing, interesting perspective to deal with. I'm lucky enough to get to interact with a lot of older people through my role at Kinship Center. I started out there teaching meditation. And when I was teaching meditation, it was so funny because I was teaching meditation to people who had been Catholic or Baptist primarily for 80 years. And
Okay,
so I was
okay.
coming in with my rockasuit on, my robe that shows that I've taken the vows and my bell and all of that stuff. And they were like, what in the world is going on? But we had these conversations and we sat in meditation together and things changed so much in me and in them. We realized that we had so much more common ground than we thought that we did. And slowly but surely, we were able to bring in programming about safe cannabis use and their rights to medical cannabis so that these people knew all of their medical options available to them in their state. And because there had been so much talking happening at that center between people of different backgrounds coming in and saying, I am different from you, but I care about you. And I'm here to offer you something if you want to do it. And if not, there's plenty of other things to do here today. People were much more open than I thought they would have been. And so the personal touch that happens when you put the religious arguments to the side for a second and say, I'm a human and you're a human, have been incredibly inspiring to me. And I think that's where we'll see change in both the cannabis industry and the psychedelics industry as these things grow. It's going to be people, not organizations, not nonprofits, not businesses that shape the way that these industries work in the future.
That's what I hear in that story was that because you went in to help them heal through meditation, you had already built that trust to be able to have those conversations and answer those questions to bridge those gaps. That's really beautiful. Community work's so important. I think work outside of this is important. This isn't everything, right? This is an hour a week people see me do. But there's definitely a lot of other work that goes into all of it behind the scenes and being an advocate and that's that being an advocate in every day in every way is when you show up to do something else and yet it still manages to unfold. That's beautiful. How did you I want to talk about the meditation. I want to talk about where that came up, why elderly. I think that's amazing. Over 65, so many people end up, I think, forgetting about our elders. And they have so much to teach us too, just like we do with them. When and why did that become important to you?
So, meditation became important to me because of my own inability to meet the world suffering without it. When I first got to law school, I was deeply concerned by the fact that I was being taught to look for what was going wrong in the world every second of every day.
Mhm.
That idea of issue spotting, risk awareness being the most important thing, I could see the way it was changing my brain and making me more pessimistic. On
Mhm.
one hand, professional pessimism is an essential quality of a good lawyer. On the other hand, you also have to be a good person.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky enough to live down the street from a Buddhist temple. And when I emailed them saying, oh my God, I can't sit still and I feel like I'm losing my mind and I'm afraid of organized religion, but I feel like I need help,
Mhm.
they were there. And I got this email back from this lovely woman who is now one of my dearest friends who said, we can sit outside if you want to. You don't have to come in the temple if you don't want to. But if you
So,
want to, I'd love to teach you to meditate.
yeah.
And she was like, by the way, everyone is bad at meditation. That's
Yeah. Lesson number one, we all suck at it.
And she was so lovely and so approachable and really took down the fear element of entering into a temple that I still remember it so clearly, walking into that temple for the first time and hearing the chant of the Heart Sutra. Avalokiteshvara, when practicing prajna paramita, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. I
Mm.
understood nothing until and thus relieved all suffering. And I was like, wait a minute. This is the most hopeful thing I've ever heard in my life. And so sitting with that, sitting with people who believe that suffering has an end date, that we can be better as human beings, became essential to balancing the very real pessimism that I have to deal with in my life. When it
Mm.
comes to the older adult community, I think a lot about how disconnected I felt from family as a younger person. I'm bisexual, and that was not a super cool thing to be in small town, rural Tennessee growing up. That was scary for me to realize. And it was something I kept to myself for a long time, but it created this distance that I felt between me and other people. And so when I started to hear about what was happening in senior centers in America and how many people were just sitting there with nothing to do all day, that familiarity of that feeling, the idea of, oh, I felt disconnected too. It felt like something I could relate to and that I could do something about. And so when my temple started to connect with the local senior center to do some things, I was really excited about this idea that, wait, that might be a place for that feeling to go where it's productive. And so I started volunteering to teach meditation, and the people that I met were so much more interesting and flexible and open to different ideas than I thought possible. And it was so inspiring, this idea that we're not all set in our perfect beliefs all the time and that we can be challenged even when we're 90. That
Yeah.
was so inspiring to me that I became addicted to it and I felt like I couldn't stop. And so now I always tell younger lawyers or lawyers who are starting to get to the middle management point of their career that the single most valuable thing that you can add to your social circle is volunteering with people who are already retired.
Yeah.
You want that person who has stepped out of the workplace to be in your life so that you have a model for what it might be like to be a person without work. And so that they have a way of still communicating with people who are in it if they want to be. There's a
Yeah.
very mutual benefit that happens there where I feel like I've learned so much and been able to teach so much in one of the most symbiotic relationships I've ever had. And I
Mm,
hope that our seniors can really be part of these developing cannabis and psychedelics movements. One of the four qualifying conditions for the New Mexico Medical Psilocybin Act is death-related anxiety. It's anxiety around dying.
mm,
And so we know that there's going to be a large proportion of seniors involved in this project and involved in making the process work. Themselves and their families will be a huge part of how we know whether psilocybin is right for that particular part of the program.
yeah.
And because we have these people who have been advocates for day one, we really are able to involve the furthest ends of aging in the human spectrum in our program here in New Mexico.
I'm very excited about what New Mexico is doing. One, it's just one of the most beautiful states I've ever been in. I really love it culturally and artistically, and just it was stunning. I definitely enjoyed being out there. But then I feel like in the last few years, they've really been kicking ass in the industry. Like it's because that they've learned from the mistakes of all the states that came before them, right? Or as much as they could, implemented a lot of things and have created what appears from California, we'll say, to be a more stable market from the start. And then now also adding psychedelics. It's what's happening over there. It's exciting. It looks really exciting. I was like, maybe I need to go back to New Mexico.
So I always say it's a wonderful cannabis market. It really is. Nobody who works in cannabis is going to tell you that the way that their state did it is perfect. And
No,
they're
no, we
right.
can't.
They're absolutely right. There is no state that got it perfect. I don't know if we know what a perfect model would look like at this point. In any kind of free market situation, there are going to be winners and losers, and competitive licensing can help or hurt that. But there are still some problems in the cannabis market here that need to be worked out. We talk a lot about how sometimes there's excess product here for the actual output of dispensaries. Even though we have a lot of dispensaries, we have a lot of very rural areas. So one of the good things that we've done is be able to place dispensaries in very rural areas. People are not driving super far to get their cannabis, which I think is really wonderful, especially when you look at the medical market. Medical is so often used in cannabis as a stepping stone to the next thing, and all it takes is going in dispensary after dispensary that is clearly not accessible to realize how medical is sometimes ignored. And I think at
Yeah.
least for positioning of licensees and making sure people do not have to travel far, New Mexico has done a really good job. The medical psilocybin program that's starting is, I think, in many ways a grand compromise. It is doing a lot of things right. It does not go as far as some people wish that it did. Basically, there are four qualifying conditions that a person has to be diagnosed with in order to access medical psilocybin. Their provider will have to be licensed and go through a training program as defined by the state. And we expect that program to roll out with first patients somewhere around March of 2028. I think a lot of people wanted to see a decrim or a low-no prioritization bill happen rather than a very strict medical program. But this really gives us a good opportunity to take in significant amounts of data on the use of
Mhm.
psilocybin for these conditions, further the scientific realm of thought here, and also see what harm looks like in a controlled situation. We have some of the evidence from Colorado, we have some of the evidence from Oregon, but New Mexico is not either one of those places. We're a rural state. People live spread out and far apart from each other. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether a strict medical program is ideal for a state that works like that. And we have time to flesh out some problems and change things before the program goes fully forward. And I hope to see it be really successful.
Yeah, me too. People need relief in whatever form they can get, and more the different pharmaceuticals are really scary. But that's what there's medical scientific studies on. And I know that's a big factor when we're talking about having to change the minds of a lot of stigmatized lawmakers, right? Is we need those studies. I also know here in California, one of the things I've been working on recently is a new compassion program because when we went recreational in 2018, we lost it. Prop 64, everyone's been in such a hurry and scramble mode with the rec market, with the overhead of the taxes and everything else. Patients have really fallen behind. I see more events with promo merch and promo products than I do compassion drops anymore. We instilled SB 34 in 2020, 2 years after rec, and that was supposed to support our cannabis patients and the compassion programs because there wasn't even a way to put in the system how to donate product prior to that. So even just the fact that the first 2 years of Prop 64 means that there were no patients the first 2 years, like in the state's mind. I think that, I don't know, it's something that just really rubs me the wrong way. It's been 29 years that cannabis has been legalized in California, and I can't see our compassion programs die before the 30th. And yet they're getting shut down all the time. Out here, a lot of the issue too for the shops to continue doing them is one, the overhead and the burden on their employees when they have that much tax burden. I 6 years
Mhm.
ago when I entered the space and found out what the tax burden was, I was like, wait, what? Oh, fuck no.
It's
So
frightening.
I'm helping here. I like a challenge. So here we are. But also just the fact that then that also makes it where brands aren't always getting paid by the shops. So then the brands won't give them donations to promote their shop as though they're doing. It's all messy. It's so messy. But the people who suffer the most from all of that are the patients. And I feel like more and more the patients are getting forgotten and left behind at a time in the world where they definitely need it more because there's more stress. Like it.
Absolutely. I would encourage everyone to remember how we got here. If it were not for the advocacy of people suffering from HIV/AIDS, people suffering from
Mhm,
disabilities, people literally having seizures on the floors of their state legislatures, if it were
mhm,
not for people living with disease and disability, we would have no legal cannabis in this country, much less recreational legal cannabis in this country. We got here on the backs of those who suffer the most. And
yeah.
if we are in any way ethical, if we in any way love this plant, we have to love the people who brought it to us in a way that we could access legally and safely. And that is the disability community. That is the medical community. We can never forget who brought us over the line. The people suffering the most carried the rest of us on their backs. And we are that next generation of advocates who is responsible for telling their story and
Mhm.
keeping that burden alive. Society gets to have cannabis largely because people cared enough to make other people care. And that was motivated almost exclusively by disability.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. I think that's where the fight is now more than anything. It's decriminalization would be great, like on the federal level. That would be amazing.
Be wonderful.
Who knows when that's coming? I'm like the last 6 years, we've all been making predictions, right? So we won't even bother. because what's more important is what we're dealing with now and how do we get through to that point if it comes. There's been so much there's been so much legislatively that's been rolled back in the last year. Texas was that was scary, right? What was going on there? Thank God for that getting vetoed by their governor. I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever thanked a Texas governor for anything before, but thanks, kudos. But meanwhile, there are a lot of other states though where it does feel like the regulations are getting rolled back, especially when talking about hemp. And then there's now this new fear being created around hemp and hemp products and the THCA and also then the fentanyl. And I don't even understand where fentanyl gets tied into cannabis. Like that kind of blows my mind. Yeah, there's just so much bad information out there.
There is so much bad information out there. And I was lucky enough to be able to talk to recently one of the architects of the 2018 Farm Bill. And this person was very clear that the intent of the Farm Bill was not to create a loophole to legalize THC. But what happened? And we have the law that we have. Way to go, innovative people that
Yeah.
figured that out. That's
There's the will, there's a
completely,
way.
yeah, that's completely interesting and fair play. You figured it
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
But
yeah.
at this point, we're in a situation where because of mislabeled, deceivingly labeled products, and also because of a lot of media storm around the idea that this is a loophole, we have people who are genuinely scared. And when people are genuinely scared, they tend to get a lot louder. And so we're seeing a lot of pushback when it comes to hemp, not necessarily based on facts, but based on the fact that this has been really frightening for a lot of people to see these really high THC products being sold in stores under labels that look like they're child friendly or look like they're completely legal and accessible and fine.
There was a pink Skittles bag that someone posted online earlier and it said Skittles. And I thought, how funny. Why are they posting a bag of Skittles? Because it just said Skittles. And then they were like, how dare someone do this? And I looked closer and yeah, 600 milligrams. And yeah,
Even if
that
it
is
duct
really
tapes it.
scary.
Yeah, it's really scary. People are freaked out. And as someone who clearly doesn't hate hemp in the same way that I clearly don't hate like the functional mushrooms industry,
Right.
I just want to see actual regulation. What I'm seeing a lot of is states putting forth emergency regs or very quickly figured out regs. State of Louisiana just recently in May introduced like pages and pages of emergency regs that like fundamentally change the kinds of hemp products that you can sell without the legislature really inviting the public in, having that public comment period, having that discussion, and issuing regulations that comport with what voters actually want to see. I want to see legislators legislate. Like you, I don't think I've ever thanked a Texas governor for much. I'm really excited. One of the things that he did in his veto proclamation was declare that we're going into special session. We're going to sit here in July while it's a million degrees and we're going to hash this out. And I'm requesting you to come up with a hemp law that can go into effect this year. I think that's going to be incredibly interesting, especially with the minor expansion, but expansion of their medical program that's happening at the same time. I want to see what they come up with. That is a market that clearly, based on the numbers, loves those hemp beverages and loves those hemp products. So it would be nice for customers to be able to access them in a way that's safe and in a way that's clearly legal on the state level.
That's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize is saying no to it doesn't necessarily make it safer. Like not creating legislation, not creating a path, not creating access just means that there is a greater potential danger when people do go to consume because like it or not, we will. We've seen that people, human nature, will go to find relief and will go anywhere into any means to get it, right? That's where the traditional market flourished before all this and still actually really is here in California as regulations get tighter and the burden of 36% tax has added up after 5 years now, 6 years. It's it's not leading to more product on the shelves that's lab tested and guaranteed and approved. And I think that's something that I wish all the fearful people would realize that their fear is not actually making it safer.
Yeah, in many ways, it makes things worse. Fear causes us to withdraw, and when we're withdrawing, we're not thinking clearly. It is when we are curious that we can think clearly. And I
Yeah.
think the hemp market really calls for some curiosity, right? There's
Mhm.
definitely some actors out there that are putting whatever in a package and mislabeling it
Mhm.
and all of that. There's a lot of really good companies that are trying to put forward great products. There's a lot of alcohol alternatives or other beautiful
Mhm.
things in that space that I would love to see people have the opportunity to choose under
Mhm.
a safe and regulated market. We've learned so many times that people don't stop doing something that they enjoy doing just because it becomes illegal. People stop talking about it. People stop asking their doctors about it. People
Yeah.
stop engaging with their parents or their children about it. And that is what we do not want to happen. We want people to be able to ask questions about cannabis and get good, reliable information. And we know that's something that legal markets are good at. On the
Mhm.
other hand, there has to be a reward for complying. When we set up regulations that do nothing but punish someone who complies with them, and I cannot tell a potential client what the benefit is of complying other than it'll be legal, the state cops won't show up, but maybe the feds still will, that's
Yeah.
just not enough. We
Yeah.
really have to have the ability of an individual operator that's not backed by large amounts of outside capital to be able to comply and pay their mortgage, comply and pay their rent, comply and buy groceries. Do I think that everyone who enters the cannabis market is or should get rich? No. But everyone who's working an honest job and complying with those laws should be able to succeed.
And do we have that anywhere
I
yet
don't
in
know.
any of the legal states? Because it's not here in California, not with the taxation. Like when I first heard that 6 years ago, and I was like, wait, that's more than overhead of most other businesses and other industries. I don't understand. That's just the taxes. And then you add overhead, the other overhead to that. It's really mind boggling. And mad props and respect to the people, especially the little guys that continue to do this because it really is a passion for helping and healing other people. It's if you're a little guy, you don't go into this to make money, unfortunately. You go into this because you have a purpose.
Yeah, but we can talk all day about how exploitative that is. I
Yeah.
think about how commercial pilots, are often deeply underpaid because their bosses know that they love to fly. And because they
Mhm.
love to fly and because they care about it and they care about safety, their bosses will squeeze every dollar out of them possible because where else are you going to get the opportunity to fly like that if you've already left the military? I, to some degree, think that cannabis falls into the same trap sometimes, where people know that we're super passionate about this plant and that it has fundamentally changed our lives in ways that we can never take back. And so we have loyalty to it and we have loyalty to providing access. And in some ways, that loyalty and that passion means that we can be squeezed and that someone can try to take those things away from us. And that's why, as a lawyer, I love getting to work with the small and medium-sized operators or the large operators that really care about ethics because we can change an industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I want to talk about Sober Zen real quick before we go. I know I've been keeping you for a little bit. Thank you. Sober Zen. I think you mentioned earlier you started that. Did you start that in college or shortly thereafter? You've been doing that for a long time, right?
I've been doing it for a long time. I started it after law school
Okay.
with a dear friend of mine named David. It was David's idea. David was a person who had quit using substances for a very long time and felt like there should be a space for those of us who had adjusted what substances we were using or changed the way that we related to substances because of our meditation practices. To talk about that without the formula of 12 step or the expectation that you are using nothing ever under any circumstances, the goal was for it to be a little more flexible and to bring in those of us that cared about meditation and mindfulness and cared about the way in which we use substances, whether that meant going completely sober, quitting alcohol like me, quitting other substances for other people, whatever that looked like. We wanted a community where people could sit down, meditate together, and know that wherever they were at in their journey with substances, if they were trying to look at it mindfully, we were going to look at it mindfully with them.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. And I love that. The idea of being sober from whatever substance, that's an individual thing and not a judged thing there too, I think is really important with meditative spaces. Makes it
Absolutely.
beautiful.
And we meet in a temple, which I think is very interesting for some
Wow.
people. I was very afraid of re-entering organized religion when I first came to the temple. And I think a lot of people feel that way. You enter a temple, you take your shoes off, you bow when you walk across the threshold. That can feel really formal and scary. But this environment really combined this very formal location with this more casual look at what it means to be mindful and what it means to use substances mindfully in such a way that I think it was really helpful for me and for others to address some of the prejudices we had around organized religion. It was healing in multiple respects rather than just being about the meditation and the talking about substance use.
Yeah. Be able to recreate that bridge. I can understand that. I have some childhood trauma around organized religion, and it took many years to heal from that, I will say. Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of different beliefs and things that, yeah, very interesting.
I think I had a lot of fear around being told what to do. Being told what to do felt like being trapped or being stuck. And
Mhm.
so, after moving away from home, graduating law school, building an adult life that belonged to me, the idea of giving up any freedom seemed really scary. And
Right.
what the temple did for me was show me that I can make choices to join communities that align with my interests and be a little bit flexible on what it is that I need in a way that's still safe and still recognizes my autonomy. And Sober Zen was about bringing that to other people who maybe had been told not to trust themselves or not to stray too far from the rules. If you
Yeah.
had questions, if you wanted to have a weird conversation, if you wanted to talk about how your meditation practice might be leading you to believe that psychedelics might be your next step in therapy, this was a meeting of sober people that could help you have that conversation in such a way where it didn't feel like you were losing your days or
Mm.
you were not the person that they thought that you were anymore. For
Mm.
me, it helped support my decision to no longer drink alcohol, but I've never felt like anyone discriminated against me because of what I do with my life or the medicines that I use to manage my back injury. And
Mhm.
that has been so incredibly important to me.
Wow. Okay. Last question, because I'm still just blown away that this even was like brought up. You are a brilliant, obviously brilliant woman and on the autism spectrum and have been asked before. I'm sorry, how did they put it? Can you tell me, repeat that question? Because I'm still just so fucking blown away by that. And out of the hour that we've just been talking, it's not come up once, but because of more stigma, and I just can't miss an opportunity to correct people and make sure people know better. Yeah, can we talk about that real quick?
Sure. So for those of you listening, before we got online today, we're talking about a previous podcast I was on where someone asked me, how is it possible that you're an attorney and you're autistic? And I will point out that I truly believe that this person was well-meaning, but that question hurt my feelings a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think it hurt my feelings a little bit because it came from this perspective that it was surprising that an autistic person had achieved a law degree or had achieved a successful legal practice. And I am just one of millions of people who are on the spectrum who have a really normal life. My
Mhm.
autism is in many ways disabling. I experience hard things every single day because of it, but I
Right.
also experience really beautiful and amazing things because of my autism. And because I'm diagnosed, because I know what's going on with me, I have been able to ask for support when I need it and also use my strengths and direct my life towards my strengths in such a way where I can be accomplished and be excited about being an autistic person, an autistic lawyer, an autistic human being interacting in the world. It scares me that so many people in our country seem to believe that all autistic people don't have jobs or don't have friendships or don't have lives or are unhappy. When most of the stigma that I've experienced because of my autism, most of the disabling aspects of it have been the result of people being unwilling to be a little bit flexible and to
Mhm.
bring in someone who's a little bit different. The vast majority of people I have encountered, on the other hand, have been so understanding and so wonderful. On net, if I could avoid the suffering that comes with being autistic, yeah, that would be great. But having the life that I have and having the brain that I have given me the opportunity to build something I'm really proud of. And my autism does nothing to take away from that.
And most of my friends, I was sharing earlier, a lot of my very close friends actually happen to be autistic and diagnosed. I've wondered if I should go get diagnosed myself, maybe someday. Were you diagnosed as a child? Is this something that you've been aware of the majority of your adult life, or is this something that came later?
It came a little later for me. I was officially diagnosed at 30. I had just turned 30 when I got my diagnosis. I was evaluated when I was 29, about to turn 30. But when we went back and looked at school records during that evaluation, it was pretty clear that the signs were there throughout. I think growing up child in the 90s in a rural area, slapping a child with a diagnosis like that could have been really dangerous for my education. So I
Mhm.
understand why my school records look the way that they do and why I was a little older when it came up. I was
Mhm.
diagnosed with ADHD first at about age 28, then ADHD or AU ADHD at about
Mhm.
29, and then finally a final diagnosis of ASD level 1. I, like many people,
Okay.
found out as we continued to evaluate that my ADHD or the behaviors that I was engaging in that looked like ADHD were most likely coping mechanisms for autism. And so, as I started to do therapy and work on unmasking, it became clearer and clearer that the true diagnosis for someone like me was ASD level 1. It's a bit of a confusing process. It took about a year, but landing where I should have landed was so incredibly important to me because it finally allowed me to advocate for myself in the way that I needed. Diagnoses are not everything, but
Mhm.
they're important tools, especially if you work in an environment like I do, where you might have to go ask someone for certain accommodations in order to be the best at your job that you could possibly be. Knowing what's going on with me allows me to ask intelligent questions about my work environment, allows me to ask for accommodations that make my life a million times easier, and allows me to be an example to younger people in the field that you can ask for accommodations and still be really successful. There is no need to suffer unnecessarily. We really can have beautiful, collaborative lives. I also try really hard to be open about this because there is this stereotype that autistic people will always be burnt out if they work with other people, that the only thing that you can do is work for yourself or work in a very small group. My
Mhm.
law firm is the most accommodating place that I can imagine working. My coworkers have truly built a neurodivergent friendly workplace,
Mm.
and they did that without me having to ask. They paid attention to their coworker and what my needs were and worked hard to meet them in the same way that I worked hard to fit in and meet the needs of my other coworkers. They really made it feel symbiotic. And I think Rudick Law Group is proof that you can work in groups and be neurodivergent, and you can be part of society and be neurodivergent, and that you don't have to be an entrepreneur just because some work environments might not be comfortable for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really important. I think there's a few different stigmas there when people think or hear autism. One, that they are people who aren't capable of taking care of themselves. Far from the truth. I feel like I know more autistic people that are like on the whole brilliant spectrum of things, like far smarter than what you do. And even just with law school, I imagine I have another friend, she's in compliance, and it's the details, right? Like really being able to get into those details. And to me, it's an important skill set. I think there's a brilliance there. But so I've just never even thought of it as a disability. So when you told me, hey, can you just not ask this? I was like, I wouldn't even, I can't even, what? What? So when y'all see, I waited till the end because I still didn't even know how the fuck to be like, wait, what? No, definitely no questions like that here. Nothing but admiration and just, yeah, a lot of admiration for what you've done to take your own personal circumstances and turn all of them into a way to help others.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're all a little weird in this industry.
A little weird.
We all got here in a little bit of a weird way. And
Yeah.
I think once again, that person was speaking from a place of admiration, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean it doesn't hurt.
There's like a lot of education still that needs to be out there. I'm like, as much for autism as there is for cannabis. And again, I think even more so in this space because 80% of disabilities are invisible. Cannabis is a medicine. I've been saying this for years. And so we're probably dealing with a lot of them and diagnosed or not. And I feel like sometimes it's even harder when you're not diagnosed. I don't know if for you, your diagnosis helped make things better. I've talked to some people who are like, oh, it like was like a light shined on. Oh, it makes sense of all these things now. I've often wondered about masking. Like sometimes people who are not diagnosed until later, do you know that it's masking or is it just such a part of the survival, like what you've had to do thus far to get to this to today? That do you feel, is that a feeling? Is it something that you're even consciously aware of before you get that diagnosis and realize, oh, that's what that feeling was and I can put that down now? Or
Yeah, so I was aware of the feeling. I was aware of the idea of fitting the way that I reacted into another person's expectations. But I wasn't aware that not everybody operated like that. I
okay.
wasn't aware that not everybody thought like that. And so getting the diagnosis and getting the word was incredibly helpful for me because I was able to go, oh, I am doing this thing. This is why I'm doing this thing. And it's very stressful for me. And
Mm,
so I can now work on undoing that protective mechanism in a safe way because I can tell people what's happening and I can get resources and I can get help if I need it.
mm,
I'm extremely triggered by noise. Audio stuff is the hardest thing for me to deal with. And for the
okay.
longest time, I had no idea why it was so hard for me. And I felt like I had to fake it. I felt like I had to like fake enjoying being in crowds or at live music, things like that, because I didn't want to seem different. But I didn't understand why anyone else enjoyed this. And then all of a sudden, I find out what's going on, and I can say to my friends, oh, hey, I'm going to wear noise canceling headphones at this concert because noise is really a lot for me. And that may seem super small, but just feeling comfortable saying that's my preference or that's what I need in that environment is so helpful. There's something about having something that you can explain. I'm autistic and have sensory issues that ends a conversation and makes your preferences more acceptable to other people in a way that I think really makes survival easier for autistic people. Not that people shouldn't follow their preferences anyways, but there is something about knowing why it is that you want something that makes it easier to ask for, especially if it's not what everyone else is asking for.
Oh, yes, that we should all feel that comfortable and know ourselves that well, what those things are. We don't. A lot of times we're distracted by all the things, shiny things over there that we sometimes hesitate to even get to know, like which of the shiny things we really need.
Absolutely. I don't really experience symptoms of depression or anxiety very often anymore because I'm not masking
Mm,
as much stress on myself to be in situations that don't work for me. I really truly believe that if you can and you think that you might be neurodivergent, get tested. You don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to get on a podcast and tell everybody that you're autistic.
but you can if you want
But you can if you want to.
to.
And also, there's something really wonderful about just knowing a little more about yourself. The first time you get evaluated, you might get some results that don't quite feel right. If that's the case, keep looking. For me, when I got diagnosed with ADHD, me and my provider were both like, that doesn't feel like the whole story, so we're going to keep looking. And as we kept looking, we found out more information and it fit better and better until I got to a point where I really felt like I knew myself. And I think that can exist for everyone. Also, dispensaries, please stop putting flashing lights everywhere and on everything. There's a lovely study that says that people who are autistic are are supposedly using cannabis at about a 40% higher rate than the rest of the
Mhm.
population.
Yeah.
If some of your biggest customers are reactive to light and sound, maybe we get rid of the flashing lights at the front of dispensaries.
Oh, I haven't seen those out here. That must be a New Mexico thing, but yeah, that sounds yeah, awful. I'm sorry.
It's funny how we talk about accessibility, right? Neurodivergent accessibility is a huge thing in both cannabis and psychedelics. And there's a ton of research to do and there's a ton to learn. And I just hope that we're taking every opportunity we can to make our spaces accessible to people so
Mhm.
that we don't lose that information that could very much help us make our arguments about how these plants are helping people.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like a 40%. So that's what I mean. 80% of disabilities are invisible. Cannabis is a medicine, which helps with so many of them. I feel like a lot of the community, diagnosed or not, ends up coming to the plant and comes to psychedelics because it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. And our world's just overstimulating. Our capitalist society is very overstimulating anyway.
An attention economy is hard for anyone to live in. So I'm glad that we have some of these tools to help us regulate.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for fighting for them.
Thank you for fighting for them. I would not be here without you. You were here before me.
Oh, I'm the conduit, but I appreciate that. Yeah, I really it's such a blessing to be able to share these stories and to be able to connect with you and other people in this space because as you've said, like people are really passionate about the people and I think that's important and I think these are the stories that help get other people to be more curious. You mentioned something about when we worry, we get smaller and I one of my sayings is turn worry into wonder. I had before all this I had social anxiety. I still have it, but it's more managed now, right? But for 4 years I only went to work and took my daughter to school. I wasn't really able to go other places. And so part of that mindset, part of it's been cannabis, but part of it's also turning worry into wonder. And worry, I feel, is like you contract so much, but then you can remember everything's divinely aligned and happening for you. We can turn worry into wonder and remember, oh, it's all happening for us. Then I wonder what's happening next. I wonder why I'm 10 minutes late because of traffic and why I'm meant to be here and why I'm meant to go and why I'm being called to that event and who I'll go and talk to and where those conversations will lead and the other ways that life will just keep opening up and really blooming. Every single one of these conversations is like another bloom opening and another way that it all makes sense. So thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. This is a really beautiful conversation, and thank you for being in the space and for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victoria. Very much the same. I'm excited. And now, oh my God, I have to come out to New Mexico because I just, yeah, I mean, I love it there anyway. But yeah, I'm really excited to see the market, really excited to see the way that things are expanding and in a market that I feel like, no, maybe isn't perfect, but has a bit of a better chance. So we'll see.
I think hope here, and I think that's a really powerful thing to feel.
Yeah.